Well, my name is Rodney Starks, and welcome to Tech School.
And right, what's the name of your company?
My company is Where's the Party LLC, also known as WTP. And
Uh,
what were you saying?
No, that was good. I know you and Lorana, you guys won the top 10 finalists. So I always give you guys props first.
Oh, yes, yes, it was excellent. It was excellent.
Well,
uh,
thanks, Rodney. And
Thank
then,
you. And I'll pass the mic to Steven.
Awesome. Thanks, Rodney. Thanks for everyone for tuning in. Whether you're here live with us or you're tuning in on YouTube, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below. All the interactions we get with videos like this, whether you be sharing your thoughts, asking a question, giving us a like, push it out to more people. So if you've got something really cool, really insightful from the video today, it helps push it out, and you might push the video out to somebody who might find it equally as insightful. So if you have a chance, feel free to do so. But I'll hand it over to Curling.
all right, what I'm going to do is I'll start the screen sharing. And I remember I want to kind of give a shout out to Joanna. Joanna actually created these slides for me and Steven, and they have this like nice color blend to it. And so thanks, Joanna. I'm not colorblind. I'm not colorblind, but I really like this color. Actually, it kind of helps out. For a lot of people that don't know about me, my name is Curling. I have an interesting. I actually should talk about my name too, because that goes to my grandpa. The next slide, but my name came from the fact that my grandparents moved from the south to the north, and in this little town called Shaker Heights, it was a Jewish community, right? And the Jewish family that helped our family out were the Curlings. And when my dad was born, they named him Curling, just to honor that relationship and community. And it was just really just a great time in our family history. We've been learning more about our family history lately. But when we were talking about community, I'm thinking of that type of community that you name your kids after that person that helped you out. And that's what we kind of feel like at Fokcus. We have like a kind of community we want to help at that level. But we're going to do this thinking fast and slow for startups. We've been doing a lot of these kind of series, and this kind of focus mentoring series that we just talk about certain books that we love and how we apply those to concepts that entrepreneurs and founders can kind of learn about. And this book actually helps with kind of decision making and how your brain works. So it's just very interesting on that part. But I am going to be speaking with Steven too. Steven has been helping us out a lot at Fokcus, and always is great at like educating us all on things. But Steven, I'll send it to you.
Sure, and I'll give you the quick 30-second bio here. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the co-founders of Fokcus with Curling. Kind of had our advanced technologies, a lot of the AI, machine learning, a lot of the cool tech that goes behind the scenes, and a lot of the stuff that we do with entrepreneurs and mentors on a daily basis. So that's my role with Fokcus. And so I was a USC grad with Curling. So fight on for all you USC grads out there. And just a fun fact, I'm also training for the Olympic trials right now. So yep.
So our brains really work really well with these kind of routes in space, or like taking a journey somewhere. So we're going to kind of have you go through this in this way. The first stop is we're going to talk a little bit about the book. Our second stop, we're going to talk concepts of system 1 and system 2, these kind of thinking systems. Our third stop is these kind of key concepts about intuition. And our last stop, we're going to talk about how you can kind of apply these to your presentations. A lot of our cohorts can be doing these city highlights soon. So we thought maybe this would be good to apply some of these to presentations, but you can apply these things to decision-making and leadership and things of that nature. Daniel Kahneman is the Nobel Prize winner 2002 for economics, even though he's has all these other superpowers. His book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is what we've been reading a lot, and we've been using it behind the scenes a lot. But the great thing I loved about him, he has a Jewish background, but is his story on why he actually loves how people think, and wanted to really delve into, like, how do people really think about things? How do people make these kind of decisions? And one of the stories I remember him saying, I hope I can explain it correctly, is that when he was really young, he was in this occupied Paris. They had the Nazis were there. They had all these curfews on the kind of Jewish community. You had to wear these kind of outfits that had like a sweater would have like these Star of David on it, just to stand out that you're Jewish. And so there's certain things that stigma to some of those things. He was really young at the time, and he was out with one of his friends, and I think it was past curfew, right? He didn't know that he was really young, and he was actually walking home, and I believe he's seen one of these soldiers. They were all black, right? One Nazi soldier. I think they were part of the SS. They were probably the extreme group that actually does all types of like really horrific things, right? And so he's definitely scared. And you know what? That the soldier actually called him over, and he looked at him. Now he had his sweater like inside out, so it didn't have the Star of David on it. I remember that. So it could have been just another like German kid, or just someone who wasn't possibly Jewish. But the soldier came up to him and gave him some money, smiled at him, and even gave him like a hug. I think in the story he said he like just held him. As Daniel was thinking back on this, he was saying, you know, he probably didn't know when I was Jewish, or in fact, maybe it reminded me of his son. He just wanted to just have that time or some sort of bonding time. But it got to Daniel, even at that early stage of his life, about like how complex people were, right? This person who did these horrific things was so kind and like loving to him. So I really love how Daniel's thought process on that. This is the reason why he wanted to think how we think and why we have biases and how decisions are made. That was kind of the initial part of it, why he created a book like this and got his PhD in these things. Steven, we have these kind of focus tips.
Yeah. So we sprinkled in a little bit of focus tips, just maybe some tidbits for those of you watching to kind of take away. So we have a focus tip here. So you can actually watch, free on YouTube, Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman actually gave a talk at Google about some key concepts that he learned, in the work that he did for his Nobel Prize and everything like that. So if you have a chance, check it out.
Now we're going to thinking systems. Yes, we've been working on our family tree. So I had these pictures of my grandfather. That's me. I think I was around 4 or 5 then. The interesting thing about when we're talking about these systems, these 2 different systems, is that even at a young age, we have intuition, right? I remember my grandfather, I would know when he was studying. He was a pastor. He had tons of books. He was always studying. I knew him when he was in study mode, and I probably couldn't bother him just by how his face looked. Right? Even at that young age, I even knew when he was happy, or this time he was always teaching me certain things and certain concepts all the time. So even at a young age, we have intuition. It's actually somewhat pretty amazing. It's an amazing system. System 1 is very efficient, and it does amazing things and understands situations and things of that nature. So I put this up here on the fact that even at a young age, we have this kind of intuition. And think of like intuition as something that happens to us. Right? We might see when someone smile, makes us smile. That's it. These things that System 1 are really good at is understanding emotions and faces and understanding these other aspects of our world. And so it's the one that we use a lot. Intuition, we use a lot. And so that's System 1.
Yeah, so contrast to System 1, what Kurling just mentioned, there's also this thing called System 2, right? So Daniel invokes kind of these 2 different agents, right? System 1 and System 2. Now, System 2 is a little bit different. It's not as intuitive. It's a little bit more rational, right? Think of like actually slowing down well, I guess in context of his book title, thinking slow versus thinking fast, right? An example with this would be, from my experience being an athlete, in college and things like that, you have this concept of, practice makes perfect, right? Things like muscle memory and stuff like that, as an athlete, you might deal with on a daily basis. And what you're really doing is, from a mental perspective, invoking System 2. So System 2 is going to be a lot slower. It's going to be more rational. You're thinking through something, right? Trying to learn a new skill, whether that be, learning how to, let's say, run better, right? Learning the mechanics of that a little more, learning how to shoot a basketball, learning how to swing a golf club, right? There's going to be a learning stage where you're going to invoke more System 2. You're going to be thinking through it as it happens, right? But eventually, it becomes more System 1. It becomes more, intuitive, right? Over time. Because our mind loves to make shortcuts and loves to, make things easier for us, right? It wants to be in a state of cognitive ease. So System 2 is kind of the the other side of the coin on that. So muscle memory and kind of practice makes perfect is an example of system 2 kind of working its way through problems in your everyday life.
I know, Steve, you have a good example you did before, but I think this is a great example for this too.
Yeah, so there's a lot of neat examples in terms of system 1 and system 2 and how they actually work and how they, might differ from each other. That Daniel mentioned in his book. So this is an example taken right from his book. So think of this for a second, and I'll kind of pause after I read this. But so imagine you're going to play baseball, right? So you pick up a bat and a ball at your local grocery store. So a bat and a ball cost $1.10, right? So now that, let's say the bat costs $1 more than the ball costs, right? Well, how much does the ball cost if you were to actually tell someone? Now, intuition is interesting here. We talked about system 1 and system 2. So what does your intuition tell you here? What comes to mind right off the bat? You can go to the next, there we go. So for most of us, a number really quickly came to mind. It was 10 cents, right? Oh, okay. The ball must cost 10 cents. But the math on that, of course, doesn't really add up. We have 10 cents plus, something that's $1 more, $1.10 is $1.20. Well, that doesn't add up to the example we saw before. So system 1 sometimes can be wrong, right? Which is really interesting. Because it loves to make shortcuts. It loves to make things easier for us, makes things easy to think through. But sometimes there is bias there, right? Now, those who might have resisted intuition and actually invoked system 2 and actually started thinking maybe rationally about this problem might have found out that the answer was actually 5 cents, right? 5 cents plus $1.05 is your $1.10 from the example. So this is just kind of a quick example of some sort of problem you might run through. That shows the difference between system 1 and system 2 and how they kind of work differently in the way that we think through things.
And the only thing I would add, Steven, is that he did this at Princeton, Harvard, MIT. Pretty much half the participants always took 10 cents initially, right? So it's just an interesting case.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So even if you're a Harvard student, right? Somebody that we might think is, super smart, super, oh, hey, they'll figure it out, right? Even they can get tricked up because we all have these systems that run through, our minds, right?
So this example, Daniel got from a book called Moonwalking with Einstein. I think it's Joseph Furr. Key thing is actually you should get from this slide is that one, we don't do really well with lists. We have a bunch of lists. We can't really memorize those that well. Our brain really works well with these kind of routes in space. And what I mean by routes in space is, and that's why I have these pictures of these cards here. There's this thing called the Memory Championship. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of it, but Joseph actually studied these people doing these massive feats of memory, like understanding what place a card is in a deck and memorizing a whole deck, understanding what that is. But how they've done that is actually how our brains actually work. And this is actually really keeping, one is actually when you're having this kind of ace of spades and then afterwards you're going to have this kind of ace of hearts, you're actually going to think about how you maybe would have a story or you might have like the ace of spades initially held by your mom and you're walking in your room and then you pass your mom and then your sister's holding the ace of hearts, right? These cohesive stories, these kind of routes in space is how people learn and understand. So one, just knowing that, right, when you're learning or even if you're doing something, having this kind of routes of space aspect is really good. The other thing is this whole thing about system 1, system 2 for the kind of school of thought for psychology, using words like system 1, system 2 to kind of describe how you think is it's kind of frowned upon. But why he uses it, and this is why it's important for founders and stuff to understand, is that when you have these agents like agent system 1 or agent system 2 or these personas, right? It's easier for people to understand that these personas do these things or these personas do these things. It's easier for us to understand concepts that way. So when we're with startups, we always say, create these personas of your customers, create these personas of people who you're going to interact with. It's going to be better for you to have that than maybe a list of things, what they would want to do, right? So that's why it's kind of good to actually understand some of these concepts, especially as founders, because we use personas all the time. We have some focus tips, Steven.
Yeah, so we got some more focus tips here. Exciting stuff. So the first tip, system one, is of course really good at recognizing faces and emotion, even if the faces are still. So this is a tip that you can actually take into when you're making slides for a presentation, a pitch deck, and things like that. Use system one to your advantage. All that, the recognition and things like that, right? Faces, emotion, and patterns and things like that. So, and then another focus tip, Curling mentioned a great resource, Moonwalking with Einstein. So if you're an avid reader or just itching to learn more about some of this stuff, check out that resource.
Now we're going to come to some key concepts. All this is basic system one stuff. It's like kind of intuition, but how we have some biases.
Yeah, so we're going to dive back a little bit into system one and talk to you a little bit about it. So a concept, relating to system one is a concept called priming, right? So we'll give you kind of a quick example. So if you were to look at the left side of this screen and say, okay, we're going to fill in the missing word here, right? So we have a list of colors, red, blue, orange, yellow. What are you going to put in that fifth slot? Now, most of us are probably going to say green, right? We have the GR and it fits in there. Now, with that in mind, now you've gone through that example. If you were to show someone that example, have them fill in the missing word, and then have them go and fill out the right side, right, that the black section, and say, okay, we're going to fill the missing word in this list of words, right? So we have a list of fruits here: plum, nectarine, pear, apple. What is someone most likely to fill in that fifth slot with? Well, since we've just gone through the other example of colors, and they're thinking about, maybe something at the top of mind is green, they're probably going to look for something green. So more often than not, somebody's going to fill in that spot with the word grape, right? So this is just a quick example of how priming, obviously we're using something very simple in a list of words, but how priming can play into how we think and how we are kind of primed to, our minds are primed to go a certain route, in things that we do. And then just to give you,
I guess, have a more complex example too.
Yeah,
Steven.
Just to give you some more like a complex example or something more real world. So priming happens in just about everything that we do in our lives, right? Whether we know it or not. And a good example of this would be things that happen in news and media, right? The way things are portrayed, the way that, certain verbiage is used in the way that things are, presented to us, right? They prime us to be able to have a certain reaction, to think about things a certain way, to think about things in a certain context, right? And so this happens from, the news talking about your local hailstorm to talking about something even more serious like the COVID-19 pandemic. And to give you guys some context on that. So if you were to, for example, the pandemic that we've just gone through over the past year and a half, a lot of the verbiage, a lot of the ways that was presented was almost like, wartime, right? And so you have a lot of news outlets presenting the material in that way, shape, or form. But when you present it in that way, shape, or form, you end up with a very high level of stress, anxiety, right? Not to say that it isn't a serious issue, but you end up with, obviously, a cause and effect there, right? Versus if you were to portray that in a different light, use a different set of verbiage, right? You might have less stress, less anxiety, more kind of like a problem solution mindset facing it.
Hey, Steven. I was I was modifying this slide as I was doing, but that was great. This other part was actually the aspect of intuition that we use. It's called substitution. It's kind of like how we actually deal with a lot of decisions, right? And I'll do it with kind of doing this example. Daniel and his colleague actually kind of interviewed a bunch of students, and it's called the dating heuristic. Pretty much, it's very simple. He asked two questions. The first question was, how happy are they with their life? One. And their second question is like, how many dates did they went on like recently, right? When they asked it in that order, how happy their life was, and then how many dates they've been on, there was no correlation with the answers, right? It was just, people just thought about how they were in those kind of separate instances. When you switch those, and then they ask the students how many dates they've been on, right? It created this kind of emotional part, like, okay, what, have I been on a lot of dates or not? Or well, it's very emotional, one. And then when they add on top of it the second question saying how happy your life is, the correlation went up, I think, 0.66. I mean, it was a high correlation. People were thinking about, wow, I haven't been on too many dates, so my life's not doing well. And we all know that how happy you are in your life is much more complex than how many dates you've been on. It's a complex problem. But that's how our system one works. Actually, it takes these complex problems or complex questions and then answers it in a simpler way, right? So knowing that that we do that a lot, sometimes it causes these biases. Maybe based on your mood, you might answer it a different way. So this is something to be cognizant of, but substitution is very efficient. In fact, it's why sometimes we don't get stumped with things. It might be wrong, but we're not stumped because we're actually taking these kind of easier ways to answer a question that's maybe more complex. So that's substitution. And we got some more focus tips, Steven.
Yeah, so here we go. Some more focus tips for you. So system one, has to read. So another tip, if you're making a slide deck or if you're, doing a pitch or, as a startup entrepreneur, make sure that your slides are not cluttered, and the words are simple, quick to read, right? We want to be able to allow system one to be able to take advantage of that, right? Put it in a presentable manner so that, system one can pick up on certain things very easily, right? You have this cognitive ease of getting the message across, right? Another focus tip, a resource for you. There's a website called Raw Pixel. That's a great resource for, adding diverse images, like the one we used on the substitution slide, to add to your presentation. So there's a resource if you're, itching and you're struggling finding images or a way to, present things during your pitch.
Now we're at our last stop. We're going to talk about presentations and see how you can kind of apply some of these things.
Yeah, so there's a lot of great things that can come about, thinking about a lot of the concepts we've shared, system one, system two, priming, substitution, a lot of cool things. So going back to some of that, there's a concept, in kind of the system one category called the halo effect. And this relates a lot to, things like, pitching for a startup or, having a pitch deck and going through it, or just storytelling in general, right? So an example of this would be, so a few weeks ago, we had a city highlight. We had Briana, share her story, Citizens Hive, and what she was doing. And so there was an obvious halo effect in some of this, right? If you kind of paid attention to it. So one of the panelists we had was Kyle, right? And he's, UI, UX, and he gave some great feedback. Now, of course, he had, a traumatic experience that he had with his grandparents that really relates to Briana's, her mission and what problem she was trying to solve, right? And so there was almost this halo effect that happened based on system one, because, Briana presented this solution that, would solve this traumatic experience that Kyle had gone through, right? And what the halo effect does is, based on some sort of emotional pull or some sort of, something that system one recognizes from the get-go, some sort of intuition, you almost have this overwhelming kind of, positive mindset about something going forward. So something that happens later on is, later on your pitch, you might have, supporting with facts, right? You could have, you go through your business model, you add some more metrics and things like that. Now, obviously, you're trying to invoke more system too. You're saying, okay, I'm presenting this. Here's my pitch. Let's say you're pitching to investors, or, you're in one of our city highlights, right? You want people to invoke system two, think about what I'm doing. So the stuff that I'm doing is not necessarily maybe as intuitive, this business model, these metrics, things like that. I want you to think a little rationally about that, right? Now, if you have something that takes place like the halo effect, you're going to have somebody who's kind of in that realm when they get to the point where you're invoking more system two, you're more apt to look at things in a much more positive light, right? Kyle, for having that experience and almost having this halo effect in that situation, is more likely to look for ways to say, how can this succeed versus, how might this fail, right? And so you're going through a business model. Let's say you're, pitching to investors and things like that. If there's a halo effect going on, then they're going to be looking for ways, okay, wow, that story really touches me, right? That really solves a problem that I had an issue with, right? It really pulls at my heartstrings. And so they're more likely to, look at that from an avenue of how can that succeed? How can this business model work? How do those metrics make sense? Versus, how might this fail? How might this not work, right? Which, can be a huge difference, especially when you're, pitching to somebody, right?
And lastly, when we first started with Fokcus, we always gave people these kind of like presentation. We gave them this kind of kit. It was like from Guy Kawasaki. He's an evangelist for Apple. He's probably one of the advisors and founders of a lot of different companies. One is Canva. We all use Canva. But one thing he always gave us was this kind of pitch deck example. We still feel like this is actually fairly helpful and actually coincides with a lot of things that Daniel Kahneman says. One, making a cohesive story, making it short, maybe having 7 to 10 slides. We think that's great. Having a short period of time. We had 20 minutes. That's if you're like in a meeting and you actually need time to actually talk. But it depends on what type of session it is. For our C highlights, I think we have this kind of 3 to 5 minutes, right? But I think one of the most important things we still feel like is pretty solid is having this kind of 30 point font slide or font size, just something that's really simple to read. System one, you have to read. You put something in front of your face, you have to actually read that. So just make sure it's really clear and concise. And I have a feeling we just have our focus tips, and this is our last slide. Steven,
Sure. Yeah, so to just kind of recap a few things, maybe into some cohesive little tips for you. So the first tip, your billboard slide, that first slide that you have is an advertisement, right? So advertisements are always geared towards system one. We've talked about the halo effect. We talked about priming. We've talked about system one, right? So your billboard slide, you want to make it appealable to system one. So it's something to think about, right? And then another focus tip, we actually have some previous videos. Joanna Kurling discussed, 7 pitch deck slides that are really useful for your pitch deck, right? And they talked about billboard slides in that video. So there's some content that actually is on our YouTube channel that you can actually go back and learn more about billboard slides and really maybe digest it from a frame of reference of some of the things that we've talked about today.
Thanks, Steven. And I know we covered a lot of different things. I see some links offhand too. I'm looking at even the questions. Is there some initial questions, and you guys can actually kind of put some of those even if you want to just unmute yourself and ask some questions. And we got Tripped. It's so cool about the Olympics. That's a good question, Steven. Like I was thinking about like one question would be for me if I was going to talk about the Olympics for you is like what I know it's track and field, but what event?
Oh, the 400 meters. So I'm training for that. Yeah, for Olympic trials this year. So
that's great. I always think like Joanna H. Did you have some questions for us? I know you delved into the book too.
I know. I feel like I've asked my questions. So I got to put my thinking cap up on to come up with some better ones. But I have a comment, which is I'm a little sad about the whole list thing because I really love lists. I'm always tempted to put lists on slides and lists in reports and lists. I really love lists, but to hear that it's hard for people to process information that way, I think is like message received, but disappointed.
Well, I know one thing is actually way you do lists are very visual, Jonna. No, you have the Kanban board. It's actually really visual. It has colors. It has certain things that's part of it. So your lists actually are really fun. I even think about how when you do your Kanban board, you have these color coding type of aspects of it. So
to try to help people process the information a little better. But that's a good point about the Kanban. And if anybody hasn't heard of Kanban and doesn't know what that is, there is a video on it.
That's great. Any other questions from the cohort? The one question I had offhand was like when Daniel had this one thing about like people asked him this question from Google about like advertisement, and he says, like with advertisement, and especially political advertisement, it's really geared towards system one, like getting your emotion and connecting with that. And one of the Googlers actually said, like, you know what? So if that's it, like advertisers really pushing our emotions and it makes us have these decisions based on our emotion, should us knowing about it, does that help it or not? Or how can we, how can we create this kind of force field? He was saying, he said, you know what? He said, system one, it's gonna happen. A certain idea will happen and will spread. And the example he actually said in some ways is actually he did a study with a group where they actually had a screensaver, and the screensaver had a pool, and on top of the pool had a pile of money, right? And he said, when he did this study, and then when the students seen this pool and this kind of pile of money, it actually made each of the students selfish. They started having certain things that happened to them. One, they put them in these certain situations where they were like in an interview and they moved their chairs a little bit further apart, right? They didn't ask for help after they seen that. There's some things interesting things that happen in our brains that when we see certain things that it's kind of hard to undo. That's what Daniel said. So one thing he says, probably limit yourself to a lot of news and a lot of negative stuff, because for one negative things, you got to have 5 positive things to kind of counteract that. So there's some question I had, like, oh, I know this now about, advertisements and stuff like that. Is there ways I can kind of handle it? So that was the one question that one of the Googlers said. But for I think for founders and maybe for your presentation, your billboard slides one, it's an advertisement. It's a billboard slide, that first slide. So invoke something, maybe some emotion towards that. And that actually will allow, like people to maybe engage and even feel like a little bit closer to the problem that you're actually having or the solution that you're actually trying to invoke to people. So that's some of the questions that some of the Googlers had too. I think we're actually doing good. What we can do, Steven, since we have no more key questions, we can wrap up and we can start like the quote unquote speed networking. And I know Briana and John is gonna have like a little breakout group, but we can start that. What do you think?
Yeah, sounds great. Yeah, I guess just to wrap up today, thanks everyone for tuning in, whether you tuned in live, whether you was able to be with us here today on Zoom, but also those who were able to tune in remotely through YouTube. Thanks for stopping by. If you have a chance, if you are on YouTube, feel free to give us a like, leave a comment down below. We want to learn from you as much as you want to learn from us, or things that we discuss in these tech school videos. So feel free to leave a comment, ask a question, start a discussion. We want this to be a community where we can all learn and grow together. And all the interactions we get with videos like this help push it out to more people. So, that like or that comment that you left could push this out to somebody who really, found some great insight, from the video today. So it's a great way to give back to the community. But as